Keir Starmer change his position on Gaza when the Commons again votes on a ceasefire this week. We'll hear from an MP who rebelled last time round.
Of course, we have got to stop the killing, and therefore calling for an immediate ceasefire is the only game in town, because we've got to stop the killing.
Julian Assange of WikiLeaks fame faces an extradition hearing that could mean he's on a plane to America in short order. His brother sees comparisons to Alexei Navalny.
I know exactly what it feels like to have a loved one, and unjustly incarcerated with no hope of release, but to have them pass away, that's what we live in fear of.
And Yoko Ono at the Tate Modern, an exhibition designed to show she's been much more than a bed-in partner to a famous Beatle.
I think getting together with John Lennon didn't do her career any good at all. I mean, it took about 20 years for her to get over that and be recognised again afterwards. She's clearly a major American artist, or a major world artist, I think.
BBC News, read by Vicky Ellis.
Sir Keir Starmer has told the Scottish Labour Party conference that he wants to see an end to the fighting in Gaza, not just for now, but permanently. Senior figures in the party in Scotland and England have insisted they are not at odds, despite delegates in Glasgow voting yesterday for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Here's our political correspondent, Harry Farley.
This week, MPs will vote on an SNP motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. In a speech in the last few moments in Glasgow, Sir Keir Starmer did not repeat the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar's description of the SNP motion as perfectly reasonable. Sir Keir said the fighting must stop now and called for a sustainable ceasefire. But Mr Sarwar has insisted he is on the same page as Sir Keir. The conflict and Labour's stance on it has caused deep divisions in the party. A similar vote in November calling for an immediate ceasefire saw 8 shadow ministers and some 56 Labour MPs break ranks to back the motion. Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the party will scrutinise the SNP motion and take it from there.
The World Health Organization says the biggest hospital in southern Gaza, which was raided by Israeli troops on Thursday, is no longer functioning. Scores of patients remain inside the building, but there is said to be no power and not enough staff to look after them. From Jerusalem, our correspondent Paul Adams sent this report.
It's extremely difficult to get an accurate picture of what's going on inside Nasser Hospital 4 days after Israeli troops first entered. The head of the World Health Organization and the Hamas-run Health Ministry both say the hospital is no longer functioning. In a social media post this morning, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said WHO teams had not been able to enter the hospital, which is still being occupied by Israeli troops. It's thought around 200 patients remain inside, being cared for by a skeleton staff with dwindling supplies. One source inside the hospital, who did not want to be named, said 11 patients had died due to interruptions in the supply of electricity and oxygen, and that several doctors had been arrested. Yesterday, the Israeli military said its troops had been told to keep the hospital running and that food and water had been delivered. It said Hamas fighters and weapons had been found inside. Asked about the state of the hospital this morning, an army spokesman said only they were checking.
A government minister has insisted Rishi Sunak is making progress on targets on migration and the economy, despite 2 big by-election defeats for the Conservatives this week. Michael Tomlinson said the losses came against a very difficult backdrop. He said the results showed that a vote for Reform UK, which is the Brexit party, would have victory to Labour at the general election. The American and British ambassadors in Moscow have laid flowers to honour Alexei Navalny, who died in prison on Friday. More than 400 people across Russia have been detained at gatherings in his memory. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports.
Russia doesn't want acts of commemoration for Alexei Navalny to spill over into protest. So since he died, police have arrested dozens of people across the country as they laid flowers. That includes a priest who wanted to lead a prayer service. In Moscow, one memorial has now been fenced off, restricting access. There's no access either to Navalny's body for his family, or any information on the cause of his sudden death. So his political team are accusing the authorities of a cover-up. They don't trust them at all, especially since Alexei Navalny was poisoned with a nerve agent 3 years ago. He always said he was fighting for what he called the beautiful Russia of the future. As one of his aides put it, he just wanted a country that was normal.
Cricket, and England's men have collapsed to defeat in the third test against India in Rajkot. The hosts set them an unlikely target of 557 for victory, but the tourists never threatened and were all out for 122. India lead the five-match series 2-1.
Many thanks, Vijay. Keir Starmer faced the biggest rebellion of his time as Labour leader when the Commons debated a ceasefire in Gaza back in November. The issue will come before the House again this coming week, thanks to a motion put forward by the SNP. And the Labour leader's position has been further complicated by a vote for an immediate ceasefire at the Scottish Labour Party conference earlier in the weekend. The Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar told this morning's Broadcasting House what he wants the vote to achieve.
I hope we can come out of that with a unified position across the Parliament, that Parliament says that violence must stop now. I have not lost hope yet that we can get the Parliament to agree, and of course the entire Labour Party to agree within that, rather than it just being a debate about who's on the what are the numbers on the losing side of a motion. I want there to be a motion that's on the winning side in that Parliament, so we can send a powerful message about what's happening on the ground.
Keir decides whether to toughen his so far cautious approach on the issue. He's bound to have reflected on the events of the past week. Comments by two now former Labour candidates, one of them in the forthcoming Rochdale by-election, led to accusations that anti-Semitism is, despite his efforts, still alive and well in pockets of the Labour Party. I discussed the Labour leader's options with Rachel Maskell, MP for York Central, who was among the rebels back in November.
Well, I believe the situation has risen far beyond that of party politics. We're talking now about human life, and with 100,000 people killed, wounded, missing, displaced, calling for an immediate ceasefire is the only game in town, because we've got to stop the killing. And with the UK stepping up in that space, we could have a significant influence then on decisions made in the US and of course across the rest of the world. So I think it's really important that we move forward now into a place of calling for an immediate ceasefire.
And how significant do you think Scottish Labour's decision on this is likely to be with members?
I think it's really important that Scottish Labour has come forward to say that they want an immediate ceasefire. That clarity has been brought this weekend, and I believe that we all want the same thing. We want this horrendous situation to move forward now into getting aid into Gaza and ensuring that we can move forward into a political process, which ultimately has to be the way forward to move forward and build stabilisation in the region.
Do you accept that things have been made that bit more difficult for Keir Starmer by what has happened in Rochdale, and the sense it's left that perhaps anti-Semitism hasn't quite been stamped out in the Labour Party?
Keir Starmer has been really clear that he will not tolerate discrimination in the Labour Party, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any discrimination based on creed or faith or no belief at all. It's really important, those values which go deep into the Labour Party, that we stand by that. But also, that doesn't mean that we cannot vote for a ceasefire. They're separate issues in one regard, because this is about the actions which the Israeli government take, and we need to ensure that we're pulling them back from that front line to now move into a political process.
That was Rachel Maskell. As we heard in the news, Keir himself has been addressing the Scottish Labour Party conference this lunchtime, and within the last half hour or so, he laid out what he wants to see in Gaza.
A return of all the hostages taken on October the 7th, an end to the killing of innocent Palestinians, a huge scaling up of humanitarian relief, and an end to the fighting. Not just for now, an end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts. Conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
We're joined now by the political journalist Rachel Wearmouth. I don't suppose you'd try to deconstruct that for us, would you? Do you think he's changed at all?
I think he's said a lot of things which reflect the position that he already has, which is for a sustainable ceasefire, as in that entails Hamas stop infighting as well as the Israeli Defence Force. And I don't think anything that he's said today significantly moves it on from that position really. Although that position has changed somewhat from November, when the Labour Party's position was for a pause. It is now for a sustainable ceasefire, which you could argue is a stronger version. I think some of his language was stronger when it came to Rafah in particular, when he said that it cannot become a new offensive of the war, but and reiterated his position for a two-state solution. But that does also reflect the strengthening of the language from the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. He said, I think, that the Israeli government has to stop and think seriously, and he said a ground invasion in Rafah is, I think he said, impossible. He used the word impossible.
It's really difficult for him, isn't it? Because pretty much any way he jumps, he's bound to annoy some people.
I think that's right. I think that the sizable rebellion that they had back in November tells you that his party is very divided on this issue, and I think it's taken a lot of work for him behind the scenes to try and bring some of the Labour Party together and get them singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to the position of a sustainable ceasefire. You know, with him backing up that position by saying it's only a ceasefire if it can actually be held in place.
And briefly, do you think, or what do you think, rather, is going to happen on Wednesday?
I think he'll have a similar size rebellion. I think it certainly hasn't been clear from anything that's been said this morning exactly what position the Labour Party is going to take on that motion, but the sheer number of fatalities, including the fatalities of children, since November, makes any political leaders more difficult in these circumstances.
Rachel, very many thanks.
Good evening, London. What a sight for sore eyes. People ask what gives me hope. Well, the answer is right here.
Remember that? Julian Assange of WikiLeaks fame speaking from the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012, not long after seeking asylum there, following Sweden's issue of an arrest warrant against him. The Swedish investigation was dropped in 2019, and in the same year the Ecuadorian authorities turned him over to British police. He was convicted of breaching the Bail Act. He's been in Belmarsh prison ever since, and the Americans have been trying to secure his extradition to face charges relating to the publication of material leaked by the former American soldier Chelsea Manning. Well, on Tuesday there is a hearing to decide whether he can appeal against extradition. Gabriel Shipton is Julian Assange's brother. He's based in Australia and spoke to me just before getting on a plane to London for the hearing.
And this whole process has been wearing him down. In 2019, Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, took 2 experts to see him in the prison, and they found that he was suffering effects of psychological torture. And so that was in 2019, and his situation hasn't changed. I went to see him at the end of last year, and you know, he's hanging in there, but it's just heartbreaking to see him in that place, and you get the feeling that he's putting on a brave face for the visitors, and that underneath he's really in a lot of pain.
You, I believe, are flying over here for this week's hearing. What's your understanding of the case he's going to make at that, or his lawyers are going to make at that?
My understanding is that under the extradition treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom, you cannot be extradited for political offences. So this is one of the main points of the appeal that Julian's lawyers will argue, is that the extradition relates to political offences, which espionage is inherently a political offence, which is what the US has indicted him under the Espionage Act. So that will be one of the main points that his lawyers wish to appeal on, and hopefully Julian wins and they set an appeal hearing down the track. But if he loses, that's it for him in the UK courts. He has no other options. The judges will order the extradition, and we know in the past there's been State Department aeroplanes on the tarmac waiting for people in these sorts of situations.
So he could be out of the country and on a plane pretty quickly.
Well, there's always the European Court of Human Rights, but Julian has to apply for an emergency stay of extradition. The European Court has to approve that, and then the British authorities have to acknowledge that, but Julian's been in the United Kingdom for 14 years. Majority of that time, I think, except for, a few months, he's been detained one way or another.
The Americans, as I understand it, have given certain reassurances about the way he will be treated if he is extradited, including, I believe, a commitment that if he's convicted, he'll serve his sentence in Australia rather than in the United States. Do you find that encouraging at all?
I mean, if you actually read these, so-called assurances, Edward, you find that they're caveated. They say, oh, we'll do this, but we reserve our right to change our mind at any time. We're talking about the people who've been pursuing Julian for a very long time. Ex-Secretary of States have joked about droning him. That's the sort of people who we're dealing with here in the United States. If you look back to Chelsea Manning during her imprisonment, she was in prison for 7 years. Obama commuted her sentence in 2017. She was the leaker that leaked this information to WikiLeaks that WikiLeaks is now charged with, publishing. She was in a cell. She was being kept in solitary confinement. She attempted suicide, and so what her guards and jailers did was strip her naked and put her back in solitary confinement. So that's the sort of thing that Julian has to look forward to, no matter what assurances the United States government gives.
You said that one of the mainstays of his approach this week is going to be the idea that what he did was political rather than criminal, but there is another way of looking at it, isn't it? That it was to do with national security and that it was indeed a crime.
Well, no, I mean, I don't accept that. I don't accept that at all. And neither do Reporters Without Borders, the ACLU in the United States, the IFJ, the largest union of journalists in the world. They all reject that what Julian did was a crime. In fact, what they say is that this indictment goes as far as criminalising journalistic activity. So it's a novel use of the Espionage Act to criminalise the work that journalists do every day, publishing secrets. You find information that people don't know about or that the public doesn't know about, and you publish it. That's what publishing is, that's what journalism is, and that's exactly what Julian did in this case. It just happened to be information that was national security information.
It's a provocative thought, this, but it's bound to occur to some people in the light of the tragic death of Alexei Navalny. Do you think that this is a free speech issue in the same way that what happened to him was a free speech issue?
Well, I mean, I feel great sympathy for Alexei Navalny's family, his children, wife. I know exactly what it feels like to have a loved one and unjustly incarcerated with no hope. But to have them pass away, that's what we live in fear of, that Julian will be lost to us, lost to the US prison system, or even die in jail in the United Kingdom. I think Alexei was, some people, saw him as a journalist, some people saw him as a publisher similar to Julian. And he was a, Russian dissident, essentially, and Julian is a Western dissident. And so you can draw that comparison.
Gabriel Shipton talking to me earlier. Well, General Jack Keane is a retired 4-star US Army general and chairman of the Institute for Study of War in the United States. I asked him why he judges Mr. Assange's extradition to be so important.
We have an espionage law that protects the system from releasing information that is so damaging to the security of the American people. It allows the judicial system to go after somebody who does this. And obviously this is a very fine line we're talking about. I mean, all of us who've grown up in democratic societies, very high regard for free speech, for freedom of the press. I mean, we're all champions of it. I do think there are mitigating issues here, certainly with his health. And I would assume that the appeal judge in Britain that is looking at this will also take that into consideration. But nonetheless, the law identifies that there can be excesses and damage done as a result of it, and that deserves scrutiny in the judicial system to determine if that is in case the facts here. And if he is extradited, I mean, he's not going to a gulag here. I mean, he's going into a United States judicial system, and in our federal system, we have varying degrees of incarceration. Some of them don't look at all like a jail. that's normally, you know, for white-collar crime. There's various options that are available in the judicial system, and certainly one was to let him go home to Australia and spend his time there as a consideration.
And do you, in terms of the big picture, think there is serious evidence that what he did real damage and put lives in danger, which some have claimed?
My sources, when it happened, said there was no doubt that there were people's lives that were put in danger because they were still active and they were helping the United States or helping our allies in one way or another.
You've no doubt about that. You do believe that real damage was done?
Well, I believe what the people told me. I believe them. I haven't seen the evidence, but I trust the people who told me that.
You heard what he had to say about reassurances of the kind you've just given, in fact, and he cites the case of Chelsea Manning as evidence that he could be in for some pretty unpleasant experiences in the American system. What's your response to that?
I doubt that seriously. I mean, he's likely going to be the #1 celebrity in the federal system, and I would assume that there's going to be a lot of safeguards to protect him and also make certain that he's receiving the medical assistance that he appropriately needs.
A lot of people do see this as an issue involving the right to free speech, the right to publish the truth. Do you think there's any justice at all? I know it's a very sensitive suggestion, but any justice at all to the comparison that some might make between what's happening to him and what happened to Alexei Navalny?
No, I don't see the comparison, but certainly have great respect, like everybody else has, for Navalny's courage in standing up to Putin's excesses and has taken him on. I think all of us who are witnessing this have tremendous respect for him and certainly regard for what his family is going through.
General King talking to Viola. Now, if I say the name Yoko Ono, what does it mean to you? Do you think simply of her famous Bed In for Peace with John Lennon? If you do, there's an exhibition at the Tate Modern designed to demonstrate that you are short-changing her, that she in fact deserves to be thought of as a really significant conceptual artist in her own right. Many of the pieces on display were first shown in London at an exhibition in the mid-1960s, and I went to see the current retrospective with Barry Miles, one of those responsible for that 1960s show.
The banging you can hear in the background is from one of the pieces where people were finishing off the canvas by hammering nails into it. And right now we're in fact sitting in front of a white chess set where all the pieces are white and all the squares are white. And the unfinished part of it is the fact that it's almost impossible to finish this game because you forget where all of the pieces are. Yeah.
But you are encouraged to sit down as we're now doing and kind of play the game.
It's a question of focusing, yes, being here and now and being aware of one's surroundings.
And there's one exhibit which we ought to talk about just over on our left, which is an enormous film of moving buttocks.
Yes, that was 365 bottoms, basically. The film is called Bottoms. It is basically all the artists and friends of hers that she could assemble. They were walking and she was simply filming their bottom. There's nothing erotic about it, it's just simply bottoms.
There will probably be many more ugly ones than beautiful ones. It's far more likely. Now, I'm a bit cynical about mine because it's worth money.
She thought that was the most vulnerable part of a human being. And of course it's anonymous. It brings up a whole lot of different feelings in people. Sadly, I wasn't in it. I was in New York at the time. I would have liked to have been in it.
Thank you for letting us know that your bottom isn't one of the ones we're watching on the left. The exhibition was also important because it was when she and John Lennon really met and had a meeting of minds as much as anything else.
That's right. John Lennon and John Dunbar were really good friends, and we recognised where there's a step ladder.
Before you go on, should we go and see it?
Oh, yes.
It's here, isn't it?
Yeah, please.
Here is the ladder, and it looks fairly innocent, fairly ordinary.
Hanging above it was a magnifying glass, which is right there, and then on the ceiling was a large sheet of paper with something written on it, but so small you couldn't tell what it was. John climbed up, and he was expecting it to say, a rude word we probably can't say on BBC, but it didn't. It said yes, and it was because it was so positive, I think, he liked that. Before that, he'd been a little bit prickly, for instance, with the nail piece, for instance. She wanted him to pay for hammering a nail. He said he would pay her some imaginary money and hammer in an imaginary nail. Because, everybody wanted money from the Beatles. Whereas with this one, he just really clicked. 2 years later, they got together and became John and Yoko, as we knew and sometimes loved them.
She's sometimes laughed at rather than with, I think. But one thing you get from this is that she clearly had, still has, I'm sure, a real sense of humour.
There's a tremendous sense of humour. We're talking mid-60s. This is before the women's movement, and there's a tremendous amount of racism around as well. So, and also, this was at the end of the Beatles period. Instead of being the mop top and the pound forward, they were now adults. They had grown up. They were having children. They had relationships and expressing opinions. The press haven't really caught up with that shift.
Let's just have a look at one other interactive one, which is a bit more serious in a way and reflects her childhood, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's very strange seeing all this stuff here, because it's now become part of cultural history.
Yes.
I think one thing I would have to say about her is that she came up through the New York art business in the early 60s, which was incredibly hard to do for a woman, let alone a Japanese woman. And she had to be tough. She had to be quite rude and abrasive, I think, in order to make it at all. And it did help, of course, that she came from a very wealthy background originally and was used to dealing with servants and people like that.
You realize that it's a gig, then it's fine. But when you're not realizing it, it becomes a publicity and every day.
There's the famous line of John Lennon as well. He said, Yoko regards all men as assistants. And that's kind of her approach towards, well, both him and the Beatles, actually, and everybody else.
Well, you mentioned her background, and just around this corner, there's another interactive piece which relates very much to her background. Just tell us what it is and what you're encouraged to do and what it symbolises.
Yes, this is another early piece. It's called Shadow Piece, and it's basically a large canvas with a very bright light shining on it. And the idea is that you stand in front of it, or a couple or a number of people stand in front of it, and they draw each other's shadows. And of course, it's relevant. It goes right back to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when all that were left of some of the civilians was just a small shadow on the wall. Also here, you see people were really enjoying themselves. So there's an element of frivolity and fun there as well.
Even though it's
got a slightly sinister. Yes, yeah.
When you put the exhibition on back in the mid-60s, she was already an established figure in America, wasn't she?
She was becoming established. She was established in New York in the sort of John Cage, Robert Rauschenberg, sort of Andy Warhol kind of circles. They hadn't really made it yet. They weren't that famous yet.
But here we are, all these decades later, with a retrospective, clearly looking around, proving extremely popular with the viewing public. Did you think she was going to endure when you were working with her back then?
Oh Lord, I think I did actually, because the ideas there were so many of them. I mean, so many artists just get one little trick really, and then they flog it to death. Whereas she's just filled with imaginative ideas, and she would do things in series. Each item was really usually quite good. Sometimes they were a bit whimsical or naff, but and then she'd move on to some entirely different things. She was just overlooked. I think getting together with John Lennon didn't do her career any good at all. I mean, it took about 20 years for her to get over that and be recognised again afterwards. She's clearly a major American artist, or a major world artist, I think. I think she'll be around in 50 years' time. I think posterity will show that she was really important.
I was part of my parents' history, and it's the same thing. The Beatles were now my history, was John's history, and I was still trying to create my own.
Barry. September, and by way of a postscript, one headline, Keir Starmer's led the Scottish Labour Party conference. He wants to see an end to the fighting in Gaza, not just for now, permanently. Ben Wright presents the Westminster Hour tonight from 10, this week's BBC and above. The editor, Mark Faulkner, and Kevin Steadley, and that's the world.
What effect is a backlog in the courts having on the British justice system? Is justice delayed, justice denied? A barrister, a Labour peer, a campaigner for victims' rights and a chief inspector of prisons try to find answers in the Today debate with Michelle Hussain at 5 o'clock this afternoon.
BBC Radio 4's Lent Talks for 2024.
Lent is a season of penitence and self-examination. It challenges us to interrogate the weaker angels of our nature.
6 meditative moments, exploring doubt, human relationships and betrayal.
1,000,000% he is not a traitor. I don't know if I'm 100% certain, but then...
Personal reflections on faith and connection.
Friendship is not sinful. It is famously one of the fundamentals of divine love.
Radio 4's Lent Talks begin tomorrow night at 11 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Now on Radio 4, Jason Mohammed looks at the perception and the reality of life on the Ely estate in Cardiff.
We all think of the built-up areas, the cars, the chaos of life. You would never dream of these lovely woods here.
This is Janice. She's going for a walk in one of her favourite parts of Cardiff, Kyra Woods. It's on the edge of Ely, which is a big housing estate where I'm from.
You can walk into these woods and you're surrounded by nature. And we all need that little bit of peace in our lives sometimes, away from it all. It's a beautiful view. I think we can actually see the sea.
Janice has lived in Cardiff all her life. She has great memories of the 1980s when she was saving up to buy her first house.
I was off having a good time and enjoying my life. Every weekend we used to go into town and there were certain clubs that you went to. Tito's, Top Rank was amazing. We used to go to lunchtime discos.